First of all, we have to thank you for your time today, honestly,
Of
and for being
course.
our host, our host in our new episode today of Moroccan Success Stories. We've gathered a series of interesting questions that we deem interesting for both of us, of course. But before, we'd like to show you a quick introductional video that we prepared, if that's all right with you.
Very good.
عبد الرحيم فقراء فخر المغاربة والمراكشيين على وجه الخصوص. ولد بتاريخ 14 أبريل سنة 1962 بالمدينة الحمراء. ترعرع في كنفها وانبثق من أحضانها محلقا نحو سماء نجومية. بدأ رحلته المهنية من بلاد المهجر، وراكم خبرة طويلة في مدرسة BBC قبل أن ينتقل إلى قناة الجزيرة. اشتهر ببرنامجه المتميز من واشنطن، فأبهرنا بصوته الجهوري العميق، وأثارنا باحترافيته الكبيرة في تسيير جلسات التحليل والنقاش السياسي. حضور وازن تغلغل في قلوب الجماهير المغربية والعربية عامة. عبد الرحيم فقراء، الصحفي الفذ، ملك الذكاء وأسد الصرامة والمواجهة. طوبى لنا جميعا بانتمائك لبلدنا الحبيب المغرب.
مشاهدينا في كل مكان، أهلا بكم جميعا إلى حلقة جديدة من برنامج من واشنطن، نبثها هذا الأسبوع على منصات الجزيرة. نظرا
No chemical weapons was sold to Saddam.
Not to my knowledge, and certainly not by me or not by the Reagan administration. And any suggestion to the contrary is inaccurate.
But you went to Baghdad, you shook hands with that thoroughly nasty man, and you supported him against the Iranians in his war against the Iranians.
I did not.
But you cannot.
Would not be stockpiles.
Right. But you cannot ascertain with certainty after the fact that there were weapons of mass destruction that justified the invasion of Iraq and getting rid of, by the way, a thoroughly nasty man. But that's not the issue here. Were there weapons of mass destruction? Did they ever turn up in any way that suggested to you deep down that the invasion was worth carrying out?
The answer is, I believe yes. I believe there is a way for the Palestinians and the Israelis to work out the most complicated piece of this is Jerusalem. I need not tell you that.
Vice President, in the little time that I have left, now you talked about the red zone. Do you think the Palestinians and the Israelis can traverse the red zone without sorting out the issue of Gaza?
No.
Had done with a government minister at that time in the UK when I was still living in the UK. And he asked him exactly the same question 14 times. And at the end, the minister said, I'm sorry.
في هذه الحلقة شكرا لكم أنتم أيضا على المتابعة أينما كنتم. إلى اللقاء.
Mr. Foukara, you were once a Moroccan student here in Marrakesh, right?
Correct.
Did you ever think, even for one single moment, you'd be where you are now back then?
What I know for certain is that ever since a tender age, I knew that I loved radio. At that time, when I was growing up in Marrakesh, obviously radio reigned supreme. The BBC World Service, I had very close members of my family who listened to it. I had neighbors who listened to it. I'd be walking down the streets of Marrakesh, and it would be blaring out of shops everywhere. So I knew that I had this fascination with radio. I knew that I wanted at some point to work in radio, which did happen eventually, because I started my journalism career in radio with the BBC in the United Kingdom. Did I back then know that at some point I would be sitting in Washington, D.C., reporting on what's going on in Washington, D.C. to the Middle East and other places in around the world? No, I didn't, because as I said, back then, my thing was radio. But I'm grateful that I've had this opportunity to actually have tried radio. I've tried working online, and I've ended up in television in Washington, D.C. It's an amazing place to be as a journalist, because you are reporting day to day on real issues that affect people everywhere in the world.
That's actually really interesting. If you would like, we would move on to our next question.
Sure.
Mr. Foukara, could you tell us more about your academic journey?
Well, I've never lost at any one time my love for radio. In fact, up to this moment, I still look back on my days in radio, and they were amazing days. But there did come a time when I zigzagged a little bit in my passion. I zigzagged in the sense that I wanted to continue to love radio, but at the same time, I developed a new passion at one time in my life, where I thought that I wanted to teach, maybe. And I proceeded accordingly. When I did my university studies, I basically, even as I was finishing my university studies in the UK, I was finishing up my PhD, and I still, I was vacillating between, at that point, whether I wanted to go into the media or go into teaching. In the end, I went into the media. But look, both of them have a lot of things in common. Both teaching and the media, broadcasting, they have an artistic side to how you communicate in both professions. So communication is one major common denominator between what I'm doing now and what I could have been doing if I had gone into teaching. If my academic days had taken me in a different direction, could still do that, mind you. The beautiful thing about being in the media, this is a field that attracts people coming to it from all sorts of different walks of life. I have with me colleagues who were lawyers, who were medical doctors, who came from different professions, and they ended up in the media. And that's why this field is so rich, because you're working with people that bring different things, different contributions to the field from their previous lives, from their previous careers. That's why I love it, and that's why it's I think for people who have a passion for journalism, I'd like them to know that this is a very rich profession that they would, if they got into it, they would definitely enjoy doing it.
Following your answer, I would also like to ask whether formal education was important in your success or to determine your future.
Formal education is very important. Obviously, I am part of a generation that was very fortunate in the sense that there was still a lot of interest in formal public education at that time. Those were the days before private education became big on everybody's radar, not just in Morocco, but everywhere else. But I would say that probably one would need more than just formal education. You need to have support from family, for example. It's very important when families get involved in their kids' education. not just in terms of pressure to actually go to school and learn, but just in terms of, in one way or another, inspiring them to do it, inspiring them to read at home, inspiring them to be curious about the world outside. Because ultimately, education is about, it's not just about, you know, achieving a career where you get paid. Education is also about having the kind of horizon, the kind of eye, the mind's eye that helps you see things a little bit more clearly as you navigate the field of life throughout its various stages.
Thank you. So you've said that there were sort of two passions fighting each other, for radio and for journalism. And you also said that formal education was not exactly necessary to where you are now, so there was more to it. How can you tell us what exactly pushes you to integrate this field of journalism, since we know there's more to it than just passion? Because, as you know, most of us our age aren't exactly sure what to do. So what can you tell us about this?
Well, first of all, I mean, I did say that formal education is very important. Whether you do it as, you know, in public school or in private school, formal education is very important. And it's important in so many different ways. One of them is that it gives you the sense of discipline that you need in life. Because without that formal discipline, a lot of people would struggle to educate themselves. In terms of the passion, I've always had, as I said, this passion for radio in particular. But also at one point in my life, I had an equally important passion, which was for academia and teaching and so on. I ended up going into the field that I had always wanted to get into since I was a little kid. In terms of, you know, young people navigating the field of their future, so to speak, and their future horizons. Obviously, it helps if you know what your passion is, you know, from an early stage in your life. Not everyone knows what their passion is from an early stage in life. A lot of young people discover that passion later on in life, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The main thing is that it helps if you have an inquisitive mind, not just in terms of the challenges that you are dealing with now in the present, an inquisitive mind in terms of the challenges and the opportunities that may come your way. And obviously, some opportunities come your way, or at least it feels that they've come your way of their own volition. But there are opportunities that you actually have to seek out yourself, and you have to be determined, and you have to be disciplined, and you have to want to do something or to reach something to be able to actually do it. What happened with me, anecdotally, when I was before I got into radio in the UK, and I was very motivated. I really wanted to get into radio, but you know, this field, it's not easy to get into the field of journalism. You have to find somebody, for example, who can open the door for you. So I was lucky in the sense that I did have the motivation, and I kept trying every possible avenue to get into radio. One day I went to the BBC in London. This is long before I joined the BBC in London. And I just wanted to get in. I just wanted to see what the building looked like on the inside. This is a building, this used to be Bush House, from where the BBC World Service used to broadcast. I used to listen to it as a kid. So I got to that point where I wanted to see what it was like. I wanted to see some of the faces that I couldn't see on radio. Some of the faces that were actually behind the microphone, broadcasting those beautiful sounds to us wherever we may have been in the world. And I lucked out. I was able to actually get in, and as I was, walking around part of the BBC, I started with the BBC Arabic service. I ran into this complete stranger who happened to be working there, a guy from Jordan. And he asked me where I was from, and I said Morocco, and he just happened to have visited Morocco, and he liked the country, and that led to a conversation. What are you doing here? And I told him, about my interest and my passion and so on. And he opened the door for me. He gave me an opportunity to actually apply for a job at the BBC Arabic service at that time. And from there, I used my passion and my commitment to actually learn from everyone that I worked with at that time, the tools of the trade. So long story short, you need to have the passion, you need to have the motivation, and you need to have the inquisitive mind necessary for exploring your future.
Thank you. It sort of clears the confusion, as as I said before, we're mostly confused. Now I think our friend here, Aqad, has something more to add.
Mr. Foukara, how did you make your way up the ranks? I mean, what were the most memorable challenges you had to face?
There were a lot of challenges, but they have been challenges that I've actually enjoyed dealing with, whether in the early days of my career in radio or further down the road. One of the early problems that the challenges that I dealt with was perception. People's perception of a young Moroccan trying to get into the BBC, and not BBC English or BBC French, but BBC Arabic. And particularly that I hadn't graduated in Arabic. I did my PhD in English. So to go to many people in the Arabic service at that time and say, "Hi, I'm Abderrahim, I'm from Morocco, and I don't actually have a degree in Arabic, I have a degree in English," that was a bit of a challenge. But, if you work hard to prove yourself, which I did, and later on, that perception changed, and people begin to be really interested in showing you how it's done. That element of support is critical. When you win people over to your side and you convince them that you are serious about what you're trying to do, it doesn't matter how long they had been in the profession before you. They generally will help you. And that's definitely what happened with me. I was lucky in the sense that later on, even in radio, I branched out, and I had an opportunity to work in other places in radio, including journalism training. I was able to run courses for journalists who were joining the BBC at one time. So there were moments of doubt, obviously. Am I going to be able to do better down the road, or am I going to get stuck where I was? I mean, those are questions that I think everyone deals with, moments of doubt. And doubt is a real challenge. You sometimes have to work hard to overcome your doubts, and to have the self-confidence and to have the motivation that where you are, you can still achieve more. And that's what I did. I moved from BBC in London to the US. I worked in public radio in the US for a while. I learned a lot. There were a lot of challenges, you know, broadcasting coming from London to the US, broadcasting to an American audience is different from an international audience. So there was a lot of adaptations and a lot of adjustments that I had to make. And then the biggest challenge was jumping out of radio to something else. And initially I jumped from radio to online. I worked with a company called allafrica.com, which is, it specialized back then, it specialized in news and analysis, gathering news and analysis from across the continent of Africa, both in English and French. That came with new challenges. You have to learn new tools. You have to learn new uses of the language. You have to learn about a new audience and what it wants. And then came another challenge, which was jumping from online to television when I joined Aljazeera. And it's been, you know, working in television is full of challenges, obviously, but it's also full of amazing opportunities. And I've had some of those amazing opportunities in the sense that I went from correspondent to bureau chief at Al Jazeera Arabic, and with that came the opportunity to anchor the show in Washington. And then my purview was widened later on as Al Jazeera increased its presence, its footprint, both in North and in South America. These are all amazing challenges, but at the same time, they are a mix of challenges and wonderful opportunities.
Thank you for your answer. And you just said that hard work is what makes the dream work, in other words. So what motivates you to work hard? And if you ever lose that motivation or you lose sight of your goals, how do you push forward?
You know, there are two important things that I would say here in terms of the motivation and what keeps the motivation engine running, so to speak. One is the passion. You know, I keep going back to the passion. If you have a passion for something, passion is an engine in and of itself. It just keeps running and it keeps pushing you forward, because it's a very interesting chemistry. Passion is, but the other components, I'm sure there are a lot more components than just these two I'm going to mention, but the other component is the sense of responsibility. If you feel that you have a sense of responsibility to something or to someone, that's another engine. When you work in broadcasting, because my work in broadcasting has two tracks. It has the management track, and then it has the broadcast track. The management track, you have to be committed to the interests of the people who work around you, because, you know, they have their own issues. They come to you with problems. They come to you with challenges. You have to be able to guide them through those challenges, or help them, if you can help them, deal with those challenges. So there's a sense of commitment there that keeps you going. The other sense of commitment and responsibility you have towards viewers in the business of broadcasting. I guess if you're a teacher at one level or another, you have a responsibility towards the kids and towards society at large. By the same token, if you are a journalist, a broadcaster of one kind or another, then obviously you have that same responsibility to the profession, first of all, being able to do the profession to the best of your ability. There will always be people who will find fault with what you do. That's a natural part of the process. But at least you have to be honestly trying to do the best you can for the profession, because ultimately what you do for the profession, you do it for audiences. Audiences come to you because they trust what you say, and they trust that you are doing your best to give them at least a particular angle on a particular story. They can get different angles from others, but they have to feel that you are committed to them and that you are honest with them. Otherwise, you'd lose them. And as I said, there are, I'm sure there's a plethora of different sources of motivation, but these two that I mentioned are, for my money, they're very, very important.
Now, you see, we would like to move on to some questions about your interviews. And because upon research, we've watched some of your famous interviews. One, for example, being with Mr. Rumsfeld. Those are rather stressing or pressuring. So how can you deal with this pressure?
It's half of the course. It's part of what we do, dealing with those pressures. And you know, I also have to say that at the same time that they are pressures, they are also fun. You cannot underestimate the part of fun in whatever you do. So preparing for an interview like that obviously is very important. It's also stressful coming into an interview like that, because you're juggling so many different things in your head, and you want to do the job right. You want to do the job right by the guest. You want to do the job right by the audience that's watching the interview. You want to do right by the institution that you represent. So these are, you know, a multitude of different things that you are juggling in your head simultaneously. But you have to do the research that you need for an interview like that. You cannot just walk into it. That interview, I would say, for me personally, that interview was rather the exception than the rule, because you know, as I'm sure you saw throughout the interview, it got very confrontational. And you know, there are types of journalism that are based on, you know, being feisty and confrontational. That's not the style of the show in Washington generally. The show of in Washington generally is to basically generate interest among the guests, and to generate interest from the audience without necessarily getting into that kind of, you know, edgy kind of confrontation, as we saw in the interview with Rumsfeld. He was not happy. You can tell during the interview he was not happy. He actually told me through friends of his after the interview that he was not happy. And one thing that was lost on him is that he was doing this interview for an audience that was, you know, essentially against the invasion of Iraq in 2003. So he was never going to get the sympathy of viewers in the Middle East and North Africa. Obviously, goes without saying. What he did not bank on was that interview was also going to air here in the United States, and it did air. Parts of it did air in the United States, and there was a lot of negative feedback towards him and how he handled himself during that interview. There was also some criticism of me, obviously, but generally there was a lot of negative feedback for how Rumsfeld handled that particular interview. But you know, interviewing, reporting, these are all tasks that come with incredible challenges, but they can also be incredibly fun. If that's what you like to do, if you like to report from the field, I have colleagues here who don't like to be in the office. They like to be out there in the field doing stories, whether it's raining or snowing or, you know, 50 degrees Celsius. That's what they like. That's what they like doing, and they like doing it because it's important work that has to be done. But also they like doing it because they find themselves in it, doing it. They find it fun to do, and without the fun element, the chemistry is never right.
So if I understand correctly, as long as one is having fun, there's less pressure. And this kind of advice is necessary for us too, because you talked about your interview with Mr. Rumsfeld. We can sort of transfer that to an interview, for example, with us and you. It can be as pressuring for us as it was for you, for example. We can move on to our next question. Thank you.
Mr. Foukara, throughout your career, you've certainly developed many skills in writing, communication, and even in time management. Skills which, I mean, can prove grateful or prove helpful to students as well. Now, my question is, how could students learn and develop sad skills for their studies, free time, and even later in life?
Well, the issue of learning, and I don't mean to be too philosophical in my answer to your question. It's a very important question. The learning is living is learning. It doesn't matter what stage in your life you are in. If you want to continue to be learning, you will always be learning. Sometimes even if you don't intend to learn, you learn. That's the way life goes. But there comes a time when obviously you make a conscious decision that I want to learn a particular skill, or I want to learn something about a particular field, whether it's journalism or teaching or being an astronaut or being a doctor or whatever. So learning is a very, very important part of it. You have to decide sometimes, you have to make a conscious decision how exactly you're going to learn. And, some people are more methodical in the way they learn than others. There are people who are, some of us are very focused on what they want to learn. And they focused not just in terms of the substance, the content of what they want to learn, but also about the timeline in which they want to learn something. Some people give themselves, they'll say, I'll give myself a year to learn what there is to learn about radio or about being, a teacher or whatever, or 2 years or 3 years or whatever. But, being methodical is important. Being focused is important. Having the knowledge where to look can also save you time. If you want to learn something, you have to know exactly where to go to find out about it. You can't just be about potluck. I'll try this and I'll try that, because you'll end up wasting a lot of time. So you have to have clarity. And I know what I'm saying. Not everyone is lucky enough to have that kind of clarity early in their lives, but clarity of purpose is very important. There's one very important thing that I have to tell you here. In terms of pursuing your career, wherever your passion actually is leading you, there are times, as I said earlier in this conversation, there are times when you have to take a detour, whether because you've seen the benefit of taking a detour to do something else before you end up doing what you really want to do, or because life forces you to take a detour. I wanted to be a journalist. Something could have forced me to do something else other than journalism. And that's, especially now when I look back in hindsight is always 20/20, as they say, that would have been okay. As long as I was able to get to my ultimate goal of being a journalist in the end, that's okay. But I think just to say, I only want to do this, and if I cannot do it, I will not do anything else. I think that can be a little dangerous, because you don't always control your destiny. You don't always control the way your life pans out. So you need to be focused. You need to know where to look for the tools that you feel you will need for a particular future, for a particular profession. And you need to have in the back of your head that flexibility, that if I cannot reach the particular job of my passion that I want in 3 years or 5 years or 6 years, it may be the way that I have to go. If I have to do a detour, I have to do a detour. But you should obviously never lose sight of the end goal that you have, even when you're doing these detours. But being focused, being aware of time, the passage of time, and having the clarity of mind and the flexibility that life requires us to have sometimes is very important.
Now, I've also would like to ask you about something which you've said before. Would you say that there is no age limit to what one can learn, to skills that one can develop?
There's absolutely no age limit. And it doesn't matter what field of knowledge. If you're really interested in it, there's no age limit. When you're young, obviously, you tend to have a bigger propensity towards learning if that's what you want to do. It's easier to learn. It's like languages, for example. It's easier to acquire languages while you're little or young than when you are in your 40s or 50s or 60s. But we all probably know plenty of examples where people in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s decided to go back to university to learn, something new, a new trade, a new skill that they feel would be useful for them for the rest of their lives. So yeah, there's no expiry date on knowledge. Whenever you feel you're ready to learn something new, you should go for it. Obviously, we not everyone has the luxury of being able to pursue knowledge in different directions and at different stages of their lives. But that does not mean that we can learn new things useful for us, practical at any stage in our lives.
Thank you. Now, you've also mentioned about clarity. You've said that not everyone is clearly gifted with this clarity of having one passion to follow. What would be like one advice that you'd give to, for example, a student that has many passions or that just cannot decide, as it might not be a gift, but some advice might help?
Well, when you are undecided, when you're undecided between two things, that's relatively easier to deal with, because ultimately at some point you juggle the two and ultimately you make your choice. The problem becomes when you have more than two passions. You have 3 or 4 or 5, and you want to do all these things, but you're not exactly sure which one you want to do. That can be a huge problem. You need to be able to pare down whatever number of passions you have to at least about 2, because otherwise you cannot focus on 4 or 5. You need to be focused full time on whatever passion you have. You say to yourself, I want to be a doctor or I want to be an astronaut. Fine. These are not necessarily close to each other as careers, but at some point you will make that decision. You'll know that, no, I get this of the 2, this is the one that I want to be an astronaut. That's it. But if you keep your options scattered by having a multiplicity of them, that's obviously always a problem. And I'll tell you from personal experience, I've had friends who actually never really knew what their passion was, and they settled for something because they had to settle for something. They ended up doing a job because they had to do that job, or because it was the only job that was offered to them, or because their family circumstances forced them to actually cut their ambition short and settle for something to, be able to help their families or feed their families and so on. There are so many different circumstances, but I'm just talking about, theoretically speaking, you cannot juggle more than two passions realistically at any one point in your life. But certainly, if you're lucky enough to know from the word go which one you want, you're obviously a lucky person, very lucky person.
I see. There's also one question that I feel the need to ask, as I've known a lot of people in my life, and there are many people that seemingly have no passion. What would you say to these people?
It's difficult to motivate people. I'm not sure if there's a magic formula for motivating people. Unfortunately, this category of people that you're talking about, there are a lot of people like that in the world. They don't know what they want to do. They don't have the motivation for any particular course in life. And I don't know what the answer is to that one. I mean, if you can pull yourself together at some point and say, this cannot go on like this. I have to make a decision. Then obviously that's the way to go. But if you get into your 30s and 40s and you still don't know what you want to do, it's neither good nor practical, because at some point you're gonna have to get a job, you're gonna have to embark on a career, you're gonna have to start making money, you're gonna have to start looking after yourself and take care of your life, and you have to have the means to do it. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people who, even at that stage, they settle for something. It's not what they really wanted to settle for, but they feel that they had no choice, so they'll take it and get on with their lives.
That seems fair. Now, to get a little off topic from passion, you've mentioned knowledge before, and we have a motto at school, which basically says that knowledge is power, and it quotes this. Do you agree, or could you at least elaborate, for example, on this motto?
Well, knowledge is power, without a doubt. I mean, especially in the Western tradition. In the Western tradition, knowledge is power. In the Eastern tradition, what we say al-ilm nur. In the Arab Islamic culture, we say al-ilm nur. Either way, whether you say knowledge is power or knowledge is light, I think it more or less boils down to the same thing, practically speaking. If I live my life not knowing, what's going on around me in the world, as opposed to you know what's going on around the world and how to interpret it and how to deal with it, then obviously you have a lot more power in the world than I do. And in many ways, even when you enlarge that to include nations, there are nations that know a lot more than other nations. And, that knowledge can be translated into power. And it doesn't necessarily have to be political or economic power. It could be just, power of the mind or power of the soul or whatever kind of power. But without a doubt, knowledge is so primordial. It has always been, and it continues to be today. And human beings without knowledge, we even in terms of being able to just deal with simple things in life, like lighting a fire or keeping yourself warm or, feeding yourself or feeding your family. You need to have the skills and you need to have the knowledge to be able to do that. And that's why we invest so many years, going through school and going through university. And some of us choose to go through university again and again because knowledge is power. Just this conversation that you are having with me now, I'm learning about what's important to you. You're learning about what's important to me, and we are having this conversation at a certain elevated level because we both have the knowledge of what we've gone through, and we both have the knowledge of what we want to go through in our futures.
I thank you for that. So be it physical power or any kind of power, this motto lives on, as it seems knowledge is indeed power. Lastly, thank you. We have one final conclusive question that our friend Safia Amin here has to ask.
بلغة الضاد نختم هذا الحوار الشيق معكم الصحفي الكبير عبد الرحيم فقراء. رجاء نصيحة أخيرة لنا كتلاميذ مقبلين قريبا على مسار دراسي جديد ومهني بعد ذلك.
نصيحة بالعربي ولا بالإنجليزي؟
بالعربي.
لا، أهم نصيحة هي ما قلته سابقا. إذا كان هناك نوع أو درجة من التركيز على هدف ما فيجب تعزيز ذلك التركيز. إذا كان هناك شغف لدى الشخص سواء كان شاب أو شابة، إذا كان لديه أو لديها شغف بمسار ما في مستقبله ومستقبلها فيجب أن يعزز ذلك الشغف. المهم أنه عندما نصل إلى تحدي ما يرغمنا ذلك التحدي على تغيير المسار مثلا وتغيير الهدف، فيجب أن نكون على يقين بطبيعة الهدف الذي نريد أن نبلغه أو طبيعة التغيير الذي يجب نشعر أنه يجب أن نحدثه لبلوغ ذلك الهدف. ليست لدي نصائح بعينها، فكل شخص بطبيعة الحال لديه ظروفه الخاصة ولديه منظوره الخاص للحياة ولمستقبله. ولكن مسألة المرونة، يعني أنا دائما أنصح المرونة في التعامل مع الطريق الذي سنسلكه لبلوغ الهدف. قد لا يكون ذلك الطريق خطا مستقيما بالضرورة، يجب أن نتحمل التعاريج إن كانت فيه تعاريج، ولكن المهم أن نعرف أن نكون على يقين بأنه ذلك الهدف بالضبط هو ما أريد أن أبلغه في نهاية المطاف.
صوتكم جميل باللغة العربية، وشكرا جزيلا لتلبيتكم الدعوة.
أهلا وسهلا.
مشكور.
First of all, shukran. But we have, why are you doing this webinar with us, despite the fact that you, as a very busy person, have your own responsibilities? Is it your way of giving back to your country?
There's so many different things, so many different reasons. This is an extremely important question. I'm doing this, yes, because you guys are Moroccan, just like me. And I think that having this kind of conversation with young people from Morocco is extremely important, not just for them, but it's important for their later contribution to Morocco and to the well-being of Morocco and to the well-being of fellow Moroccans. It's also very important because, you know, when I was going through my formal education in Morocco, we didn't have this kind of opportunity. This is a great project that you guys are having, being able to talk to Moroccans who have been able to travel and, you know, do things outside of Morocco. It's extremely important for not just for your future careers, but it's also extremely important for giving you the skill to actually conduct these interviews. This is a skill that you guys have, and it's a unique skill, and it's a wonderful skill. And if it can help you in this informal conversation with somebody like me, I am sure it will help you in a more formal context. Let's say when you have a job, and the way you conduct yourself and the way you interact with people around you. And finally, the fact that, you know, we having you and us having this conversation, it's very thrilling for me, because for me this is like a back to the future. You know, like now I'm having a conversation with people who I was in your shoes at one time. So for me to experience the pleasure of, you know, thinking about these things through you now, you guys being at this particular point in your life, it's a sense of immense gratification, but also immense enjoyment, the fun that I mentioned to you earlier.
This was truly an insightful interview. So we also wish to be in your shoes one day, perhaps interviewing students that will be our age then. Which is why we also thank the ever-evolving school for giving us this opportunity, and Mr. Hilali, but we also thank you most for this time that you have given us for such a rich and insightful interview. As you know, as you said, we both have the knowledge and this level of conversation that we would hold.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to, I would be amiss not to thank you also for giving you, the school, Mr. Hilali, for having given me this wonderful opportunity to have this kind of conversation with you at this particular point in your lives.
You're most welcome. It has been our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. We shall see you someday soon, maybe, perhaps.
You will. Yeah. I have no doubt you will be ready, and I look forward to actually meeting you guys in person at some point when I'm in Morocco. I would really love that. I look forward to it.
So do we, sir. So until next time.
Thank you.
شكرا.